Hello, everyone who's signed into the webinar, moving from diversion programs to harm reduction and rights for sex workers. So we're going to get started in about 1 or 2 minutes. We're just getting our speakers logged on. But while we're getting started, I wanted to tell you that I'm a representative of the Best Practices Policy Project, and we're simply here to do the technological side and set it up for Monica Jones, who is the CEO of the Outlaw Project, and Jules Kim, who's the CEO of Scarlet Alliance, to speak. And once they're done speaking, Janet Duran of New Jersey Red Umbrella Alliance will be fielding questions. So please send your questions to Twitter at NJRUA, that's at New Jersey RUA, at NJRUA. Tweet to Janet, ask your questions, make your comments. You can use the hashtag #SexWorkDiversion with your question. And if you're so inclined, you can also use the hashtag rights, not diversion, and some other hashtags that Janet is using. But please send your questions there. If you can't tweet, then there is a box for chatting beside this webinar, and you can put your questions in there, and we will do our best to get them out. So I hope that everybody's assembled and that you can see us on the webinar. So now I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker, who is Monica Jones, the CEO of the Outlaw Project. She's located usually in Phoenix, Arizona, but today she's speaking to you from New Jersey. And she's going to introduce the rest of the panel from here on in. I'm going to put myself out of the picture. And what you should see is the logo of the Outlaw Project coming up on the screen. And that's a logo that's, it's called the intersectional hair logo. So you'll see that coming up.
So hello, everyone. So my name is Monica Jones, and I will be presenting about moving forward from diversion to a harm reduction approach. And so let's get started. And so let me get the screen up, my PowerPoint up. So we want to get started of like defining what is diversion. And the basic thing is I looked up some definition, and the best one came from Wikipedia. And this is basically saying that a diversion program is through the criminal justice system to deter a behavior which deemed criminal and to redirect that to something positive and to quit that behavior. And so under diversion programs, that's what it's for. And diversion programs for sex workers, and what are they? And so in the US, there are several types of diversion programs. So we have pre-arrest diversion programs and post-arrest diversion programs. And the post-arrest is like when someone is being arrested by the police. It's usually when they go to court. The court offer them the diversion program, and it's usually only offered to first-time offenders, which to avoid like the minimal days in prison, such as like, let me give you an example in Phoenix, Arizona, like Project Rose. Project Rose was a pre-booking diversion program that uses law enforcement to go out into the community through the internet through Backpage and street-based sex work and target those sex workers. And what they did was arrest them and offer them the diversion program, and that's pre-arrest. And so it's basically the same thing. And so post-arrest diversion programs, it's the same thing. And sometimes it is offered through the same organization, such as in Phoenix, Arizona, like we have Catholic Charities is a diversion program that is offered. And they offer this was through Project Rose and even through the court system. Okay, let me get them. And so let's get into like a little bit more about my experience. Some of you may know my experience as being arrested through Project Rose. And like we said, Project Rose was a pre-rest diversion program. And the reason why I was arrested for just walking down the street, and these are under these manifestation laws, and these laws often are used by diversion programs to get clients. And so if we, I was handcuffed, taken down this, even though my picture, even though I didn't go to jail, or I still was fingerprinted and had to be interviewed by a police officer, and even though I was innocent. And these diversion programs are designed to build the economy for other individuals. And so, but what type of diversion programs are there? There are so many. And so if I go back, we have community-based diversion programs, which are such as in Phoenix and like New Orleans, we have Women with a Vision. And that is community-based program, a community-based diversion program that it was designed by people, individuals who are impacted by those laws. And one great thing that how this worked, this program who operates from a harm reduction approach, or is let me clarify this. Operates from a harm reduction approach is like they went into their own community and decided the needs within their own communities. And this was not no external force coming into the community and saying, this is what you guys need. This was the community members in that community building the program that best fit their needs and built their own assessments. And one great thing from Women with a Vision, they challenged the laws within their own community that police their communities. And so you hear this thing about broken windows policing. These what Women with a Vision did was they went in there and said it was these laws that made crimes against humanity laws, which made it possible for the prosecutor to tack on a sex offender charge. And these sex offender charges carried you around, so it stopped you from getting a job. You had to go on a sex offender registry. And this is for individuals who engaged in sex work. And what Women with a Vision did, they went and fought those laws and got those laws thrown out. And so this is an example of when a diversion program, a harm reduction program designed by the community works for the community. And these things needs to be happening within our community. And so we don't need programs like Project Rose. And when we talk about these programs like Project Rose and these diversion programs like LEAD, the recidivism rate and the success rate of these programs are very hard to find. And even from Project Rose, the creator of Project Rose, there was no difference between pre-arrest diversion programs, and pre after diversion after booking diversion program, there was no success rate. There was no different success rate. And what this does, even if you go in front of a judge, it's still going to funnel you into the criminal justice system. And in this way where you go, it's not the judge you're seeing, it's the service providers that see you. And the reason why these programs are so out there is because of funding. It is because the funding. And it's really hard for organizations like these harm reduction organizations to get funding for these for programs. And that's why so many organizations that are run by sex workers and work by individuals within the community and activists might move towards a program from a diversion program model and take that funding. It's so hard to get funding, so they are making money off our bodies. And so if a diversion program is not in the business of pitting themselves out the business, then they are no different from the law enforcement, the criminal justice system, the prison. Because if you're using sex worker bodies, minority bodies, to build your program, and you're not doing the work to attack those laws that police those communities, it's a very hard program. And I think it's very important that individuals within those programs are lined up correctly with the members and those communities. And me as a social worker, I have a social work degree, and it's these programs. We get this thing called autonomy. If you don't have autonomy over your body, if you don't have autonomy over the programs you choose, then it's the effective rate of your client successfully finish those programs is low. And so many of these diversion programs go into the community with a list of things you need to meet, and such as like 30 to 60 hours of 30 to 60 hours of time and meeting. You might have to attend 2 meetings a week. And then like in Phoenix, there is a whole week from 9 to 5 program that you got to do for 5 days a week, where you're in a building, listen to police officers and everyone else speak about what makes you a bad person. And so programs like these do not work. And so when we look at the finance of why these programs and why people go for these programs, it's all about finance. But what we really need to focus is look at, if you have a diversion program, if you're looking to build a diversion program and you're not in it to pitch yourself out of business and coming from a harm reduction perspective, then you're no good to that community. Because if you're not advocating for decriminalization of sex work within the US and outside the US, you're pitting harm against our communities. And so when we get into the harm reduction model, there is so many things that are there. And so if we look at the harm reduction model, you go into the community and to the community, and sometimes you're a part of this community. We know the needs that we need to survive and thrive in this world. We are the experts with about us. And so many times it's these external forces that come into our community and say, this is what you need. We need rights, not rescued. And sometimes the basic needs are housing, um, access to healthcare, access to condoms, access to these issues that are policed within our own communities. And so if you give out condoms and you take a harm reduction approach to sex work, pass out condoms, get individuals to prep, but the police uses those same things to criminalize the sex workers. It's not a thing. So we must attack the law. And even if you go in for the Swedish model, here in the US, the Swedish model is used against trans women, especially trans women of color. Such like in Chicago, even when they said we are not arresting the sex workers, we're going to arrest the clients. But many trans women are perceived as clients because of the M on their ID, because of gender marker on their ID. And that's the issue. And so when we move from diversion to harm reduction, as a harm reductionist, you must attack the laws that create harms within your community. And so those things are very important, and we must talk about those things. We must talk about the harms that these laws, due to the criminalization of sex work, does more harm to individuals in the sex trade and the sex industry than clients and any other else thing besides that. And so I also want to talk about let's move towards a model like in New South Wales, Australia, where sex work is decriminalized and such like in Sydney. And so I think I'm going to kick it off to Jules Kim in Sydney, Australia.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Jules Kim, and I'm the CEO of Scarlet Alliance, Australian Sex Workers Association. We're a national organisation, but we are located in Sydney, and as such, my sex work, has happened in Sydney. You have to excuse me, I'm having a bit of a PowerPoint failure this morning, but my excuse is it's actually 7 a.m. in Sydney, and being a sex worker, I don't do that well with mornings, so you're just going to have to listen to me talk, I'm afraid. It's interesting. In Australia, we have a system, we've got different laws in each of the different states and territories. So we actually do have similar programs to diversion programs where sex work is still criminalised or where it's licensed. And then we have a very different framework where sex work is decriminalised. And we also have situations where those diversion programs or what's termed as arrest referral programs are actually have referrals to sex worker organisations. And I'll speak a bit about the challenges of having sex worker organisations within that, I suppose, criminal justice system, where inherently it's problematic because sex work is being criminalised. And in order to access that program, one has to plead guilty, and you actually have to agree to take charges in order to get access to the program. But very differently, we do see that when sex workers are running those programs, it doesn't take this view of sex work as being inherently harmful or exploitative. So we're not just getting useless counselling, like repetitive counselling for this problem of sex work, where we see the kind of focus shifting to more practical things, such as housing and perhaps like how to fill jobs, holes in resumes, to get alternative work, things that are kind of practical for people that might want to move out of sex work. And of course, as sex worker organisations, we do often get accused of only wanting to support people to stay in sex work, but that's not the case. I mean, as we all have periods in our life where we move in and out of sex work, and obviously for all of us it is a economic necessity, but there is that issue of having difficulties in being able to justify, being able to get other work. So that's why these support programs do focus on perhaps where that person is. So that's the difference when it's run by sex worker organisations. So it's looking at what sort of training that you might want to get, or what sort of, what field you want to go into. What are the skills that you've utilised in sex work, like, that you could reframe into a different occupation. So, obviously as sex workers, we're all kind of small business owners, and we've all had skills in considerable skills in negotiation and financial management, and a range of different things, advertising, promotion, and this is the way that sex worker organisations can understand the skills that we do use in our job, rather than seeing sex work as just completely devoid of skills or exploitative. I mean, some of the issues, though, for sex worker organisations that have, for drug user organisations or community drug user organisations that have been involved in those arrest referral schemes, is that there's it basically means that you're working within a very a police and criminal justice system, which is inherently unfair, and which is inherently criminalises our population. So it's very hard for to establish credibility for those organisations as they're having to work within those systems. So as you can imagine, there's a view that if the organisations are working with the police or with the courts, that you can imagine the challenge in that situation. It's but I think the situation that came up for a lot of the organisations was balancing that with seeing non-sex workers running these organisations and how harmful they've been and how useless. And as Monica spoke about, and they do get the funding that should be directed at our community. Obviously, we don't end up seeing any of it when it is run by those organisations, and it becomes directed into supposedly addressing the PTSD that we all have from being sex workers. So other issues that community organisations have raised is that, the difficulty kind of working with the police and the courts in the perceptions of the aims of the arrest referral programs. So there's a fear that from the workers that their role in promoting harm reduction are pretty much ignored by the people that are funding the schemes, people such as the government and the courts and the police. So, but I guess ultimately it is positive in the sense that it does mean that the people that are getting access to the program are potentially getting access to things that are more helpful in their lives, and certainly anything's got to be more helpful than the existing diversion programs. So what, as Monica spoke about, when sex work became decriminalised in New South Wales, and it became decriminalised because of two things, and that was so I was sex working prior to decriminalisation in New South Wales, and prior to the advent of decriminalisation, there was widespread police corruption. So it was pretty much understood that at that time that police, everyone kind of paid off the police and, got tipped off, and people had to take turns in getting arrested, so that it actually kind of looked like on the books that the police were doing their work. But inherent to that system of criminalisation and licensing, where police are the regulators of the sex industry, we know that there's widespread corruption and abuse of sex workers within that system. And there was a inquiry into the widespread corruption of the police in the New South Wales sex industry. And as a result of that, and also at that time, it was also at a time that HIV was emerging and really impacting hard on sex workers. So at that time, it was the confluence of those two things that led to the government taking the approach to change the laws, and looking at the different frameworks of the laws, they realised that instead of criminalisation, licensing also wouldn't work because, or legalisation as it's called, wouldn't work because it still meant the police were the regulators of the sex industry. So, and that's why this decriminalisation was introduced in New South Wales. And because of that, we do actually have a very well-funded peer, 100% peer sex worker organisation called SWAP New South Wales. And they have a range of different programs. They have a counsellor for people that do need counselling, because some of us do want counselling, not just counselling for the issue of sex work, but actually counselling for a range of different reasons, because as human beings, obviously, sometimes we do need counselling, sometimes we do want counselling. So they do actually have a range of different services that kind of meets the needs of sex workers. And I think that is really the difference between these programs that are run by non-sex workers trying to deal with the problem of sex work, to actually having a sex worker-led program with a oversight process and a governance process that, like, of a governance committee comprised of sex workers, and with staff like bilingual staff, that for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sex workers. And, I think that is a much more effective way to deal with that. But obviously, it works because sex work is decriminalised. In the States, where it is still criminalised, we do have sex worker organisations, and they are doing great work, and they do have to work within the system that exists. And fortunately, we have actually successfully advocated for those programs to be actually now run by sex worker organisations within Australia. But it does present a challenge for sex workers organisations to be working within a framework that we know is really harmful to sex workers. But as I said, ultimately, I think, it is better for sex workers to be doing that, and actually kind of directing resources to services that make sense, that are actually practical and useful in our lives, like finding housing, like finding alternative employment, like, getting further training if people want it, or, so that's kind of basically how the system currently works in within a decriminalised framework. So I'll just throw back to Monica.
Oh, thank you, Jules. I don't think they can see me or not. Okay.
No, I think I've lost you.
Okay.
Is your mic on?
Mic is on, but I don't think my camera's on.
Do you want to go to the camera in the basement?
Yeah, so give me 1 second while I move downstairs so you guys can see me. And so let me run downstairs and I'll be right there.
Okay, we got another camera. Here you go.
So yeah, so as I was saying, when we talk about like when police are actively involved in these processes, like so many diversion programs, we run across these issues where coercion comes into play, such as and just with any interaction with police, right? And so we see like here in the U.S. we have 13 Black women, right? And 13 Black women was the sexual assault of 13 Black women by one police officer. And that happens sometimes all the time with sex workers engaging in sex, where sexual assault is not by the clients, it's by the police officer. It's rather, are they going to charge you or let you go with a citation? Or if you're going to do jail time. And so things like that happens every time when it comes to decriminalization of sex work. And decriminalization of sex work and the diversion programs look like Black bodies. They use Black bodies to fill up these programs to build revenue for themselves. And so if you look at it from a harm reduction perspective, if we see a specific demographic, racial demographic, or any demographic going into a program, we must think, is this program working to best fit the needs of those individuals? And luckily for me, I got to go to Sydney, Australia, and work, do an internship at Scarlet Alliance, which was very fun and very nice. And I got to see what real harm reduction looks like, right? And so I got to go and see them pass out condoms and do these clean needle exchange. I got to see a community of individuals working together within their own groups to help lift up the voices of sex workers. And so this was really great because this took it from out of the hands of law enforcement, out the court, and made it a job, made it where if you worked in a brothel, there was health code violations, health codes that needed to be, the brothel needed to take care of. And so when we look at moving from a harm reduction, we must include all these measures. And also when it comes to harm reduction, and we looked at, I got to see is like individuals who engage in sex work have the autonomy of their body. It wasn't forced health screenings. You went at your own pace and everything else. And so these gives the autonomy of our bodies that we need. And so we don't need a diversion program. We don't need to sit in the class and hear a police officer talk to you about girls being arrested before a tragic story of a sex worker who was HIV who was killed. We don't need to hear that. What we need to hear is, how can we keep ourselves safe if we want to continue to thrive in this world and to sex work? We need to hear about like services out there that doesn't decriminalize everyday action. I want to see the dismanagement of this white capitalistic country. I want to see we move towards where everyone has the right to their body and to exist in a space where we are not criminalized based on what we do. And I think it is time for questions, and I really hope that people are ready to ask questions and lift up the voices.
Let me just check and see if we've got Janet on.
Okay.
Can you text Janet, or do you have her text? Because Janet's had some trouble getting on the presentation today, so we're just going to try and find her.
Okay. Don't you love technology?
Yes, we tested this. Let me just send Janet one more invitation to see if she can get on. If not, I'm going to check Twitter.
What Monica was talking about in terms of criminalisation of women of colour, because that still happens in the Australian context, but they call it trafficking. You know, so we still do see that same criminalisation of women of colour, you know, and Asian women, but under the guise of trafficking. I think there's and I think we've got Janet on there now.
Oh, did Janet arrive? Yay, Janet is here. So I'm going to leave this camera free for Monica, but Janet, please, if you could ask any questions that have come up, and I've spoken to Monica about this, and she said even questions that seem to be—
Oh my God, what is that?
Any kind of question they want to take, you know, even question, you know, basic questions, complicated questions, questions that push back, they're ready to take those questions. So I'll now give Monica this camera seat back.
Well, I've got a question for you, Monica, while we're waiting. Is there, so within those diversion programs, in the counselling sessions, what happens as you've been on the other side and you've actually been in one of those counselling sessions, what actually happens? Are they done individually or as a group? And I think you were saying there's police involved in those counselling sessions as well, which is just outrageous.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
So like one counseling session was like, it was like a whole bunch of people, and it was basically, we just talked about like how you were not going to sex work anymore, and like what kind of ambition you had for life, right? And so someone was like, actually I was kicked out of the program because I was like, you know, this is something I want to do. This is something I have autonomy over my body. And you tell me where a Black trans woman can make enough to thrive in this world. If you give me another occupation, then please tell me where I can make enough to thrive. And so in these counseling sessions, it's so much of like, I think one funny thing was like, they played Private Dancer by Tina Turner, and they dissected that song by saying, look, you don't even see the clients as individuals. And like so many times, like I was like so many times, like I'm a counselor to my clients, I'm a therapist, like I'm like a person that they come talk to about questions and problems that they won't even talk to anyone else. And so these diversion programs belittle and demean what I do for a living, by saying it's just something that harms women and it harms individuals who engage in it. And so, but the issue is that in these diversion and these programs, the criteria and what they cover makes you feel like a piece of shit. And even when you leave there, it's kind of like I learned how to be a better sex worker because how they tell me how they catch individuals. And just because you are someone on drugs, someone who is homeless, does not inquire them to share your pictures and these programs. And like a lot of people, they would go across these cities and videotape these individuals on the street or on the stroll and play it back in a diversion program. It requires so much from individuals.
Yeah, right. And yeah, that's just unbelievable, isn't it? You know, and did it's very funny, I mean, but also very tragic. Playing private dance, it's almost like a form of brainwashing, isn't it? You know, it's they're trying to repeatedly playing private dancer over and over again.
Computer is working, and if you want to go back upstairs or stay here.
Okay, stay here.
Yeah. Janet?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we're ready for your questions.
We didn't have too many, but I was texting on the side. People were just asking what was going on and how come they couldn't see the video. I was logged onto the YouTube from the side when I couldn't get on the Hangouts. I was on the YouTube on my other browser. But people are interested in finding out if they can get Jules' PowerPoint presentation that she was having a problem with.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I can email that through. Absolutely.
Okay, sure. And I can forward it to the folks who were asking because I did see who was asking on the side, so we can send that out. So anyone who wanted Jules' PowerPoint presentation, even though we had technical difficulties, we should be able to get that out to folks.
Yeah, I think it's more fair to say I had technical difficulties than we.
I think we all had a little bit of technical difficulties on one end or another. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna make a list of everyone who needed it. So far we have Gary Paul wanted it and HorLogic and anybody else who needs it. We will be forwarding the PowerPoint. So just email or send us a message on Twitter and we'll get the PowerPoint out to folks.
Okay, no problem.
That's all I see so far. There haven't been any other tweets coming through. So anybody else who's up?
I think we got a pre-question as well about talking about the pre-booking and post-booking program. So, maybe you want to talk a bit about that, Monica. I think that question came in to us earlier.
Okay, yes. There's no difference. It's just an extra step in between, or the absence of physically going to the jailhouse and seeing a judge. There's no difference. So like, I've been on both sides, right? Where the first time I was arrested, I was arrested, I was booked, and like 15 hours later I was out and I had to sign a plea deal that I will attend diversion programs. And so I think there's no different. Even when I went to the, even when I was innocent and I got falsely arrested, falsely accused of sex worker manifestation, I went to diversion programs such as Project Rose, where it's the same form of things where they look at your arrest records, they look you up and see if you're eligible for the program, and if you're not eligible, you go to jail or you go get a trial date. And so there's no difference between pre-booked and post diversion programs because there's no different. And like, if someone knows a difference, like, please tell me because I see no different. And this is a person who's been through both, and there's no different because sometimes they are offered by the same organization, by the same program. And so whether it's LEAD, whether it's Catholic Charities, I see there's no different because it's still police intervention. And so if we're not moving towards a drop-in center where you can get condoms and speak to a counselor, talk about your issues. And like, I really love this New South Wales, that SWAT New South Wales. They had this lovely place where you can go and get condoms. You had King's Cross Hospital van driving it up and down, passing out harm reduction packages and everything else. And so here in the U.S., what I've seen, there's no difference between pre-booked and post-booked diversion program.
Interesting. I mean, what do they expect that people, after the counselling, these diversion programs, how do they expect people to make a living? Do you know what I mean? Do they have any suggestions for what people are supposed to do to make an income?
Work at Jack in the Box, work at McDonald's, work at Burger King, and all these like service jobs, because like you have that, it shows up on your arrest record that you were arrested, even if yeah. And so like they want you to be like, get a job and stop sex working, because it shows their success rate of their program. And like, and so many times they don't offer childcare.
Right.
They don't offer housing. And like if they do offer housing, it's in a homeless shelter and everything else. And so what they want you to do is stop your way of life, because if you had an apartment and you were taking care of your children, DCS is involved now and everything else. And so these causes worse. And so if we move towards a harm reduction, I hope to see the diversion programs move towards harm reduction, where they include all these things and people are not being arrested just for surviving. And what we need to look for is these ways where individuals who go through like a program or decide to go through a program, either way, where they have childcare, they have housing, they're not forced to quit their job, and they're not forced to sit through a week-long 9 to 5 class. That's like a job, and you're not getting paid for that. And so how can you pay your rent? How can you survive?
Right.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if Janet is capturing these questions, but there's a few questions coming up on the YouTube stream. Janet, do you want to ask those questions, or should I go ahead? Are you seeing?
Yes, I got them right here. We have one from Victoria Law. Let me scroll back again, because a few have been coming in and it's been refreshing it. Okay. I just saw it. It's better in my Twitter. Let me go on my Twitter. Okay, we have from Victoria Law wanted to know if sex workers with HIV are being treated in Southwest Australia. How are sex workers with HIV treated? And are they treated differently or criminalized for having HIV? That's for Jules.
Jules, go ahead.
Yeah, there's different laws in different states and territories for sex workers living with HIV. In some states, sex workers with living with HIV can't work. In other states, they can. In other states, it's the case that they can if they disclose that they're HIV positive, which is also, of course, another form of criminalisation. I mean, we know now that the science has 100% proven that if somebody has undetectable viral load, then they are untransmissible. So the laws haven't actually caught up with the science to recognise the fact that if somebody has undetectable viral load, there is no risk of transmission. But fortunately, look, in New South Wales, we just had a law change just very recently, so there's been a lot of media around that, where they've removed the need for disclosure. So previously it was like the sex worker had to disclose that they were living with HIV, and the other person had to voluntarily accept the risk. But now they've removed that, but the law just now says that if you're living with HIV, you need to take reasonable precautions. So, so there are very different laws in different states and territories. But, you know, as you know, there's still a lot of stigma and discrimination, a lot of it which in this day and age and with what we know now and what science has proven just does make no sense.
Other questions?
Okay, there's another question for asking about criminalization in Australia. They would like to know if you can elaborate on what decriminalization specifically means in the Australian context. Is there a
Sure.
difference between it in New South Wales and New Zealand? For example, in New Zealand, only citizens and permanent residents are covered under the Prostitution Reform Act of 2003, which decriminalized sex work.
Right. Yeah, look, it's so the decriminalisation in New South Wales has meant the removal from the criminal code of laws that criminalise things such as sex work and brothel keeping. It doesn't. Unlike the New Zealand law, migrants and non-citizens and non-residents can sex work if their visa conditions allow it. So there's, you know, it kind of, you know, we've got the immigration law, which is federal, and then the state-based laws. So actually, if the visa conditions allow you to work, then you can sex work. So basically, it means so that it's the criminal laws have been removed, and that sex work is governed by things that, like Monica was talking about, like WorkSafe. Like, so you have occupational health and safety kind of managed by WorkSafe or Safe Work, sorry, and you know, theoretically, like, you know, we can have access to industrial rights mechanisms through Fair Work and the Fair Work Ombudsman, but obviously there's still a lot of stigma and discrimination in recognising sex workers' work. So we do actually have some contradictory pieces of legislation that sometimes don't support the framework of decriminalisation. But when it does work, and we do see it work, and it's certainly much better than any other alternative, we do see that you know, that it means that sex workers aren't being exploited by police. We can go to the police in the advent of a crime and you know, and report crimes against us. It means that if we have experienced unfair work conditions, that we can you know, get legal assistance to address those. And if we don't like where we're working, we can go and work somewhere else. Unfortunately, what we don't have within the decriminalised framework is anti-discrimination legislation. We do have that currently in 4 states of Australia, but not within a decriminalised framework. If we do get the legislation through in South Australia, that's kind of a nice model of full decriminalisation, which encompasses anti-discrimination legislation. And it also has a component of spent conviction. So if somebody has a criminal conviction just for sex working, that gets expunged from your record as well. So we've got our fingers crossed. It's been passed through you know, it's already passed through the upper house, and it keeps being delayed. It was supposed to be voted on a couple of months ago, and then it was supposed to be voted on in October. So it keeps being delayed, and it's but hopefully it's just at its final stage, and it might mean that we will have a second stage that has decriminalisation in Australia. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question. This is Monica, perhaps this is for you. Down in DC, somebody would like to know if there is a way to have a diversion program to be a stepping stone towards reduced criminalization. That's coming from our dear friend Darby and down in DC.
Hey, Darby. Oh my gosh. Okay, so yeah, there is a way, but that name Diversion program leaves a bitter taste in people's mouths. And so, but like, if we look at Women with a Vision, right, that is a great way a program where that program is working towards the freedom of Black bodies in New Orleans and criminalization of individuals in New Orleans. So if you look at what happened in New Orleans, I'm going to restate it, that they were having individuals who were convicted of a sex work sign up as a sex offender. That is Black bodies, Black trans women, Black women, Black queer people signing up as as a um a sex offender. And so what they did was pass the law. And so yes, there is a way, but we must look at Women with a Vision and see how they're doing it. And I love Women with a Vision because this is a prime example of how it works in the US when marginalized communities come together and build a program that best fit the community needs. They are the expert on their community. They're the expert on their community assessment, the community needs. They're the expert. And they treat them and they go in and they do so much amazing work because they're the expert of their community needs.
Okay, thank you, Monica. That brought us, I hope that we had Anna Forbes had asked about if you knew any other programs besides the Women with a Vision that are working constructively here in the U.S. That was a perfect way to go into this next question.
So, I think I might know, I think I know like one other is St. James Infirmary, which is a health clinic in San Francisco that works with sex workers and everything else. And so I think that's one other program that I see out there, and that takes a harm reduction perspective and work around sex work. And so there are probably a lot other out there that under the Diversion umbrella or under harm reduction, there might be a lot other. But we don't know because there is no research out there to do the assessments. And even when I tried to get a fellowship to do that, I wasn't able to get the fellowship. And so what we really need is funding to do these research, because the research out there there's not that much research. And what we get is from the courts and from individuals who've been through those programs. And that's why I like about Scarlet Alliance that they had the research. And it was amazing just to see tangible research about sex work. And that's how, when you have a community and when you do harm reduction and you are free to move around and free to do this research, that's how that can happen. I think it's very important that we move towards a criminalization of the research.
Do you know what CBO means?
Community-based organisation.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I always forget. It like things slip my mind. Okay. That was also a question coming in. I always forget the little that's my bad. Okay. There was another question about that on community-based organizations. I always forget when I'm looking at 3 different devices at once what I'm trying to do. There's nothing else on Twitter, so now I'm doing the YouTube. I keep going back and forth between 2 devices, so woo, my head's all over the place. Anna wanted to know if there are harm reduction organizations colluding with law enforcement on diversion programs. Huh. I know there's one in Newark. Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know who can answer that one. And the other question on community-based organizations was coming from our partner at AOGC, and how can community-based organizations, thank you folks, help out with providing harm reducing help for our sex worker colleagues?
So what we need to do is organize funding. And if you have funding, if you have things, give to those organizations who are out there doing the grassroots work. And so, such as like, there's a lot of organizations who are working on policy work here in the U.S. surrounding sex work, and there's a lot of groups who do like swap who does work and who does chapters like that. And so, what what we need to do our work is funding, because the funding out there is so little that we can't do our work fully. And so many times that individuals, such like myself, have to sex work to do our work, to do this community-based work. And so if we have funding, the things that we can do is unlimited.
Yeah, and I think community-based organisations can support sex workers by having sex workers in their governance structures and having hiring peer sex worker staff. And it's really important to have those programs guided by local sex workers, because they're the ones that know what's best for sex workers, you know. So I think that is really, there's no replacement for it. And even when we were talking, Monica was talking about the research and why, you know, there's a lot of bad sex worker research, I think, that doesn't really tell us much, and is in fact kind of just reinforces the bad stereotypes and stigma against us. And what was really effective for us was partnering with research organisations and having sex workers leading that research. So I think there is no substitute for having sex workers involved in every level of the program design and implementation, to ensure that it meets the needs of sex workers.
So we have like 5 minutes more, then we'll wrap up.
Okay, I have one more question I found. Would you like to know? It's pretty general. They wanted to know about how diversion programs work. Can you talk about the specifics of what they do, what they expect, to what extent are sex worker orgs involved, if at all, or excluded from this process? I think generally we talked about it already. I mean, a lot of things already covered it, and we are, you know, primarily excluded from what I see, but if you guys want to expand on that.
Yeah. So what I see is that diversion programs, they have this long list of requirements, right? And so, like, I'm gonna talk about Catholic Charities. You have to do a 36-hour program, a weekly program. You have to attend 2 classes a week, depending, and they might tack on more classes. You have to there's no childcare. There's no way for you. There's no, I think they offer you a mock interview to teach you how to do interviews for jobs. And so what they offer is shit. They don't offer you really a good piece of shit. Like, me as a sex worker, I can survive by doing my job. My work is my work. I have a college degree. If it wasn't for sex work, I wouldn't have a college degree. If it wasn't for sex work, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have the resources and the friendships that I have today. And so for those individuals who wants to paint sex workers as immoral, your morals not my morals, your God is not my God, my body is my body, not your body. and I have the right to do what I want to do with my body. And if you're so concerned about bodies, then go into the prison industrial system. All those bodies in there who are wrongfully convicted, who pled guilty to a charge because the system is broken, and that are in there for the war on drug crimes, who are serving 15 years life sentences for drug-related charges, who are serving 3 years for sex worker-related charges. And so let's not forget about Marsha Powell, a sex worker in Phoenix, Arizona, who was sentenced to about 3 years in prison, and who died halfway through her sentences, who was murdered halfway through her sentence. She was left out in the hot Arizona sun. And so, and that is like about, it gets pretty hot. So it gets about 115 degrees out there. And I don't know how much that is in Celsius, but it's pretty hot. And so, and when she was left in a cage, her body was covered in blisters where her internal organs cooked. And that's the way sex workers are being treated. We really need to work on these policies that criminalize sex workers, criminalize the act of sex work. I think when there's a day where we are all liberated, then we can cheer. But what we have here in the US is horrible, and it restricts the traveling of individuals. The decriminalization of sex work restricts the traveling of individuals. It restricts the job opportunities. So just in case, say if I want to leave my job profession and get a job, I can't get a job because I have that on my record. And they might say the U.S. is the land of the dreams and everything else. No, it's not, because we can't get jobs because of our criminal records. And so we can't get housing. And if you are a mother, your children are taken away. And so what we really need to do is attack those policies. And so if there's no other questions,
just hang on. I'm going to say some closing remarks about how to donate.
So hold on 1 second. I have someone's coming in. They're running downstairs. But it's really great to see how many people who logged on to the webinar and took time out your day to watch. And I think it's very important that we do these things and talk about these programs and everything else, because if we're the experts of this field, and so if no one else is talking about it, we must talk about it.
Hi. So this is best practices coming back right at the end. And I think I hope you all noticed that as we went along with this webinar, it kind of smoothed out. This is our very first webinar, and it was primarily a volunteer put together effort, and we have no specific funding for this effort. So I would like to tell people that if you want to donate to Monica's work, she can receive donations through PayPal. I'll be putting the PayPal just in a moment. I'll put it in the chat feature where you're looking at the webinar right now. And I don't know if Jules, if people have a way to donate to your work, or Janet, if you would like to give a shout out. But I would certainly get Monica's links out there, and as you shout out yours, I'll put them in the chat feature. No one should feel obliged to donate, but if you have ways that this amazing work can be supported, the support is needed, because, you know, this is a shoestring budget here. You know, there are no monies for salaries. The Outlaw Project has really maybe a matter of hundreds of dollars in its entire budget at this time. New Jersey Red Umbrella Alliance has a very small budget, and best practices, we probably have the most, but we still don't have enough to employ somebody. So please give to the groups that you've seen presenting today, And please shout out Jules and Janet. I don't have yours right at hand.
I don't think we actually have something set up yet to receive donations. I know we were able to get some through C, but we could probably put the link up on our Twitter later. We'll send it out to folks if we can do that, PJ.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay, sounds good.
And I would encourage everyone to donate to you guys, because I mean, we are actually funded by the government, so you know. I would definitely, another benefit of a decriminalised environment is a funded sex worker organisation. So I definitely encourage everyone to fund the great work of Best Practices and Outlaw in New Jersey as well, Red Umbrella Project Alliance.
Thank you so much, Jill. It's nice seeing you, seeing your face every time I see a smile. And keep the magpies away from you.
You and the magpies.
No, magpies, there's nothing else.
So I
need you to come back to being off, Monica.
Thank you, everyone. We might stay around chit-chatting. You never know, because we don't get that much chance to speak to Jules. But this is officially the end of the webinar, and we really hope you got stuff out of it. We'll be sharing the recording, and we'll be putting up all the resources in various places, and anyone who emailed me to do RSVP will be sending you out a group email with all the resources. And I think if you've had a look at Monica's PowerPoint, it's pretty great, and I'm sure Jules will also be pretty great.
Bye. Are we? Okay.
I guess we can say bye.
Bye. Thank you.